In this video, we're going to talk about specular reflections. Coding is the first video in the series. Then we discuss applying maps and bump in the second video, and now this is the third. If you're looking for coding or basic parameters, you'll want to watch the previous two videos. Okay, so I've just scrolled those up, and here we are, and these are the defaults, right? So this is where we're starting. All right, so let's talk about specular reflections, which I'm going to call highlights. I think people just understand what highlights are better, but they're the same thing. Specular reflections are the highlights, the little bright spots of light on our objects where the direct light hits the object and creates that little pop. And without that, our objects are flat. We need our highlights in order to create three dimensions. So highlights, midtones, and shadows, which you work with in Adobe products, are what helps create three dimension. And in our case, it's all an illusion. By default, this is set to 1. And what this does is it controls the brightness of your highlights. How bright are your highlights? So as of right now, you can see they're very bright. If I pull this down to 0, you see how up here it already got flatter, but when I render this out, it greatly diffused my highlights, and I don't have those little pops anymore. I still have them because this is still three-dimensional, but it changes the look of my character from something that's got some reflectivity to something that's very flat. He looks like chalk now, as opposed to before he looked like plastic. Now, here's kind of in the middle. So you have a sliding scale with this, and again, this is a percent from 0 to 100, 0 to 1, and so you can kind of looks like a marshmallow now. Right, so that controls the amount and the brightness of your highlights. Color. You pretty much are going to leave this at white most of the time, unless you're doing something metallic. And I'll just go ahead and change the color so you can see it. Let's use a bright color. Okay, so this is what happens when we change the color of our specular highlights. You see those little, maybe you can't. Let me try a more saturated bright color here that's a little more obvious up against that blue sky. You can see now, before those were white, just white. Now they have color to them. All right, and that you really only need that if you're going to apply or try to make this look more like metal. Okay, so I'm going to change that back to white. You can apply a texture map here, and sometimes you have those. We haven't really talked a whole lot about that because it's really kind of advanced, and we're probably not going to be able to get into that in this class. But you can apply and I'll show you what one looks like because I went ahead and downloaded one to show you. So this is a specular map. And oh, I'm going to have to go back and add the image that goes with that. And I don't know if you remember from the previous video, but this was very dark. By adding that specular map, it caused the highlights to make this look more three-dimensional. Okay, and that's what a specular map does. It's a black and white, very black, very white, very little gray, that causes anything that's white to really pop out. Okay, so I'm going to remove those for now. Let's see, base color, clear, scroll that back up. Okay, clear. Okay, so then we have the roughness. And the roughness is the glossiness of your highlights. The lower the number, the sharper your reflections, which means it's more mirror-like. And the higher the number, the more diffused the reflections. So let's render him out. Now watch what happens when I increase this amount as soon as it gets done rendering. Okay, so now I'm going to increase this to 1. And you see the reflections are now very diffused so that he doesn't reflect. If I drop this back down to 0, he should be more mirror-like. Okay. Whoops. Yes. So make sure I had the right number. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do here is talk about the metalness. This is one of the big things that you'll adjust your specular reflections for beyond whether or not you want them to be sharp or you want them to be diffused. So right now my metalness is 0. And what that means is that there is none. And it's another sliding scale. And I can bring this up to 100. When I render him out, you see he becomes mirror-like. Almost perfectly mirror-like. And that's another way we've talked about controlling mirror before. This is another way to make it mirror. And the index of refraction by default is 1.5. And so these two can work together to create a variety of different metals. Because metals aren't all just shiny and mirror-like. Sometimes they're rather dull. So if I bring this somewhere in the middle, oops, and render it out, I get a less mirror-like image, a less mirror-like metal. If I also reduce my index of refraction, I'm going to bring this down to 1, it also takes away some of the shininess of the metal. So you might have a rough texture or rough metal that you want to use, and you can do that by lowering these numbers. So the lower the number, the more diffused the metal. It looks pretty good actually for something that was like an appliance, right? You get some metalness to it because it's metal underneath, usually with some sort of coating over it, and then an index of refraction that you can see that it's metal. Now let's add a little bit of color to this. Oops, my roughness. Set that. There we go. And so this is still metallic, but it's a little softer. It's not quite as bright as this mirror. Okay. Okay, I'm going to take this down. And I just want to quickly cover what these are. For the most part, I don't really mess with those. The internal reflections is, let's just turn it off and you'll see, is whether or not it reflects on the inside. So I just, for the most part, don't turn that off. Okay, so your indirect specular removes highlights from the shadows. Or should remove that. Let's try taking that out and see. And it does a little bit. Okay, so if you're getting some weird, say, probably need to change the basic parameter to a darker color. You can see what I'm talking about. Oh, it's because I turned that down. Okay, so I have a high, say I have a high index of refraction here, and it creates, if it gets too light down here, you turn this off. Here's the difference. Okay, so you see right now the light is indirectly, it's hitting the object, it's bouncing, and it's indirectly hitting the underside of the character. That's with this set to 1, right? If I turn this down to 0, watch the difference. I don't get that bounced light anymore. So indirect specular is simply bounced specular light that allows us to see in the shadows. Okay. By default, it's set to 1, but if you want to turn that off or you want to reduce it to another number, you can do that. Okay. And then your anisotropy has to do with the way light reflects off of metal, and then the rotation of what angle the light hits. I just really haven't messed with those very much, haven't needed to. And that's a little more advanced, and it requires talking about physics. So I'm just going to say just leave these as the default for now. And if there's any problem, I haven't come across a situation where I really needed to do a lot with these, but it does control, like if you're working on a metal can, like a Coke can, or something that has a brushed metal, you may want to add a little bit. If your metal is too flat. That sort of gave it a little bit more of a 3D pop to it. Okay, so that's what this controls. And then this is degrees, although it's not in degrees. It controls the rotation of the light, where the light is coming from. Or where I'm sorry, not the light is coming from, but where the reflection is bouncing to. Okay. I'm sure I don't mess with that. Okay. And so that gives you a pretty cool character. He's kind of a strange green. Let's give him something a little warmer. Color does impact. Let's do this. So I'm going to change these to golder shades, more golden shades. And you see I've created a little gold character there. So this is a relationship between the base color and your specular color. And this works for metal. Let's see, my metalness is off. Let's turn that on. A little too much. You just got to kind of play around with it. Make adjustments. Oops. I want to make that brighter on the base color. There we go. And now I have a gold character. He probably needs to be a little more, it needs to be a little brighter. And you would definitely enable your caustics on this one. Let's see. There's my roughness, my index of refraction. Let's jack that up a little bit more. Specular. Okay, let's try that. That's pretty good. That's very gold. Now he's kind of greenish because he's reflecting some of this blue sky. So one of the ways to offset that is just to make it a little bit warmer. Just took out a little bit green, add a little bit red. Let's make this a little bit brighter. Saturation, a little bit, nope, it's pretty high. Okay. And then we'll do the same thing here. We'll just make it a little less green, a little more red. Oh, pretty good there. And help take some of that out. Okay. Stop there.